that. And I just for fun for you, Rick, I'm just going to pick on a few people for them to tell us where they're located.
Okay,
just so you have a sense. And so Rory, I know where she's located, but I'm just going to start with her.
Hi, good morning. I'm
Hi, Rory.
I'm in Gloucester, Massachusetts right now, and I am sitting with my puppy Nigel, who's passed out right now.
He's very excited, I can tell.
He is. He's eagerly awaiting this.
Great. And Sabrina, where are you located?
Hi, I'm actually located in Quincy, Massachusetts right now.
Arthur, where are you located right now?
I'm in Italy, Tuscany, on the coast.
Oh, great.
Poor thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jana.
Hi, I'm actually at school right now, but I
Oh,
live in Norwood.
and Carla's just logging in, but I could ask where she was in the summer, which is interesting. And she might, I don't know if she's available to talk, but she was on the Isle of Harris working on a seaweed farm in Scotland. So we've got people spread out in a lot of different places. I'm going to just suggest that we get going. You guys know me by now, but you don't know Rick, and Rick has kindly agreed to give us a tour and a kind of description of the ARC is how we commonly refer to his facility, which is otherwise known as the Aquaculture Research Center or Corporation in Dennis, Massachusetts.
Aquaculture Research Corporation.
And they're located in Dennis. I've been there, and it's kind of a lot of fun. There's a lot of really interesting things going on. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Rick, and maybe if you want to give a little bit of your background and then maybe ARC's background, and then give us your spiel. That would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. I like to work very informally, so if anybody has any questions at any point in time, please just feel free to interrupt, and I'll be happy to answer. The company I run is called Aquacultural Research Corporation. We're in Dennis, Massachusetts. I don't know if anybody's been down to the Cape, right on Cape Cod Bay. And we are primarily a shellfish hatchery. We spawn hundreds of millions of oysters and clams every year to support the local shellfish economy, which is very important to Cape Cod. Right now, the population of wild shellfish, wild oysters and clams is at a very, very low point. It's about 1% of what it used to be. So anybody that enjoys going out to a restaurant to eat oysters off a raw bar, they would not exist if we relied strictly on wild harvesting. So the oysters and clams primarily that you get now, whether it be in stores or in restaurants, they're grown on farms. And these are generally 1 to 3 or 4 acre farms that are essentially independent businesses for growers, and they will choose either to farm oysters or clams or a mixture of both, and they use many different techniques in doing it, but the bottom line is that they need to buy seed. And that's what they buy from us. So we have a hatchery. We spawn the oysters and clams. We grow them to a certain size. We actually sell 8 different sizes of oysters and clam seed, anywhere from about 2 millimeters in size to about 25 millimeters in size. And the independent growers will decide what size they want for the equipment they use, for how soon they want them to come to market. So, they have to run their businesses like a business. The seed they purchase from us, the small seed, let's say a 2 millimeter seed, it may cost $12 per thousand units of seed. The bigger stuff, they may pay $70 a thousand. But the difference is that with the larger seed that they purchase from us, there's less mortality and it's a lot closer to being market ready. So they have to decide, for profitability's sake, and as I said, for whatever equipment they have, what size they want to purchase from us. We've been in existence since 1960. The name Aquacultural Research Corporation meant something back then. It doesn't mean as much right now. Back in 1960, every dollar spent on research was tax deductible. So the people that started this business, who were part of the Avon Products family, there was a lot of money there. They knew what to do with their money. And so they put the name research in the company name so that we could get a lot of tax breaks at the time. We find ourselves now with the word research in our name, trying to sell wholesale oysters and clams, and that's tough to do when you've got oysters and clams coming from a research company. So we have decided to market ourselves wholesale wise under Chapin Sea Farms. So we have the ARC hatchery and Chapin Sea Farms wholesale market. My background is not in aquaculture. I graduated the University of New Hampshire with a degree in business management, and pretty much what I've done all my life is run small businesses. I had a marketing company for about 25 years that I just got a little bored with and lost interest in. So I saw an ad for a sales and marketing manager for this Aquacultural Research Corporation, and I applied and I got the position, and then a year later I became president. So I don't know everything that I need to know about growing shellfish, but I'm smart enough to hire the people that do. We have people here. We're about 26 people, 28 people. Probably a little more than 50% are women. Probably 70-something% are below the age of 40. So it's a very dynamic business. Our employees are anything from farmers to people with degrees in marine biology. So it's a very, very interesting group of people. We work on a spit of land that's probably one of the more beautiful spots on Cape Cod. So it's a very easy place to come to work every day. So that's kind of a little brief outline of who we are. I do have some video. Unless anybody has any questions right now, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, we'll get into the video portion of it, which I hope works. Shall we just do that?
You need to share your screen first.
Yep.
And then, yes.
So it says you've disabled screen
Oh,
share.
right. Haven't disabled it. I just have to make you a co-host. Hang on one sec. That should work. Tell me if it does.
Got it.
Great.
So the first thing I want to show you, this is just a still of where we are. This is our facility in Dennis. Out here is Cape Cod Bay. And I'm sitting in this building right here, which is our hatchery and our office building. We have about 11 acres of land out here. We are very concerned, obviously, with things like erosion, rising sea level, But as you can see, this is not such a bad place to come to work every day. The other, I'm going to show you now a video, and this is an amateur video starting in our hatchery. Some parts of it might be a little bit difficult to hear because of the background noise. But basically what I'm going to do is give you a 15-minute or so walkthrough of our facility, starting with how we do spawning and into the warehouse area. So I'm just going to let it run, and we'll talk after that. It's spawning day here at ARC in the hatchery. To make the magic happen, we turn to our larval and female production manager, Cheryl James, who is taken the co-op and we're working with after 8 weeks of conditioning, and is helping with spawn right now. So Cheryl, what are you doing?
Well, first we put all the co-ops in individual buckets because if one of them spawns, we want the gametes to be separate from one another. And what we do is we exchange their water and raise their temperature. And we can also add sacrificial sperm to the bucket as well. And that will, trigger them to think that others are spawning in the water column, and they'll start spawning. So once we get a spawn going and the animals are spawning, we take the eggs and we collect all the eggs from each of the females in their individual buckets. We put them in a 5-gallon bucket. And then we take from the selected male, the prettiest, most fastest growing male. We take the sperm from them, and then we selectively start fertilizing the eggs in the bucket. And then we look at it on the microscope and make sure that there's enough sperm per egg. And then we wait for about an hour and a half. And then the eggs actually start going through the dividing process. And then we physically do counts on the eggs by, diluting them for 120 dilution. And then we do counts and we put them away. Things like this called harvest.
Target goal for every spawn. So how many did we start with? To try to reach those goals? How many do we have on the table now?
Well, we have actually 3 tables going now, and we have about 60 animals, and it actually depends on what population you want to get out of the spawn. And it depends on the size of animals that you're spawning. So usually with a large spawn like this, we're trying to achieve like 150 million eggs. So right now we have 60 animals on the table, and if we don't reach our goal, we'll try it again on another day. And then typically we get a really good survival from day 0, which is the spawn day, to day 2. We can get anywhere up to 90% survival. And then from there on forward, they go through metamorphosis, and then they turn into juvenile. And then there's a culling process where we're constantly discarding the bottom 10% every other day. So we end up with a fast-growing animal. And then, so we just figure in all of our culling procedures and our percent survival. And that's how we know what population, we're going to get out of the spawn, because we have average survival.
So at this point, when you put the animals in the buckets, you don't know what they're able to do.
No, they're
Fingers crossed.
yeah. And there has been a time that you could choose 10 animals, they could all be male. So what you do, so what you try to do is we actually put a lot of extra animals on the table, so that you're much better off having too much and getting rid of the things you don't need, or doing a larger call on a different day, and then you get the fastest growing animals.
So leaving the hatchery and the spawning area, the animals can stay in there for about a month and a half or so until they get to be about 1 millimeter in size. And during that time, we're feeding them the whole time. And in order to do that, we have to create our own food. And I'd like to introduce you to Lisa Carrasco, who's our hatchery manager and kind of the head chef here.
She's the one that prepares all the food. This is going to explain how we do it.
Yeah, so welcome to the ART Aqua Production Room. So in this room, we generate all of the food that all the babies and moms and dads need, from the 2-day-old larva all the way up through fruit stock. And we do that by growing 2 different species of algae. The first is a diet called Aquaculture, and the second is a plastic called isobraces. So basically, behind me are carbonates, and we grow ways for health days and use them to inoculate the production tubes. And in the production tubes, they go for another 3 days, and they would then skin and then put it to distribute to pounds per ton. Essentially, algae are the diet from Glacia syrup, and we use these in our big tubes, and then on the top and the bottom is where we have our isobraces.
Explain the different colors and what's happening.
Yeah, so the color is a general indication of the density in each culture. It's also quite indicative of the age of the culture. You can see here we have these particles here, which basically look like water, and that's because they only have a very small amount of algae in them. And then here you can see this middle set is a much darker, tannish, orangey brown color. And that's because these are 2 days old. Those are an hour olds. And it's every time they sort of replicate, and each individual cell is a golden color. So if you have a couple, it doesn't look like much. But if you have a couple million per milliliter, that's when you get a browner color. And you can really see it in the isobraces on the top and bottom. They really get a nice, rich, dark brown color. And that's what we're going for. Our second method that we use to grow algae, we explored this option several years ago as a way to have more algae reliable on demand. It also uses less of a footprint and uses a lot less labor-intensive practices such as the big tubes. And so we looked into something called bioreactor by a company called Industrial Plankton. And so this is it. We call it lovingly the robot. Essentially, it's a machine that uses all the parameters that we monitor by hand in the big tubes. It does on its own with sensors. So essentially, it'll monitor its own pH. It'll add carbon dioxide when needed. It has the lights that can be scaled up from 10% of very low photo intensity all the way up to when it's a really dark harvest algae. And essentially, this machine replaces about 4 of our big tubes every day. That's by a method called continuous culture of algae, where so for the big tubes, we basically harvest the entire tube every day, clean it, and restart it. With this machine, harvests about 25% of it to a third, and then refill it with the right amount of nutrients and water, and basically keep the algae growing continuously. So that lets us have a culture that lasts for a lot longer. We hold the record for the Glacia syrup, which is what we grow on this, for 96 days in the world. And it basically reduces the amount of labor we need. It's way smaller than the big tubes, and it uses about 20% of the energy that the large algae uses. It has a self-cleaning cycle, so nobody has to jump into it and scrub it. And it basically maximizes what we can produce in a smallest amount of space possible. And this, we hope to get more and be able to increase our alpha production so that we can then in turn increase our larval and our seed production.
So to have successful spawns, you have to start with good food stock, the moms and the dads. And here in New England, our oysters and clams want to spawn normally in the summer months when the water is warm, the temperatures are warm. But in order for us to fill all the need for seed that we have to start spawning in January. And so part of the process is to condition the animals to make them think that it's the middle of the summer. And so that's a combination of different temperatures, different foods that are given to them. It takes, as I said, about 8 weeks for that to happen. And these are all individual food stock tanks. These are their own individual systems, their own water supply, their own food supply. We learned the hard way that we need to keep these tanks separate from each other, because if one plant decides it's time to spawn, everybody in that tank is going to spawn. And if that tank is connected to every other tank, they're all going to go. So, as I said, we learned the hard way. So these are all individual systems. And it's critical to the process that we pick the right food stock. We have a strain of our own. We often have wild harvests coming to us with clams or oysters that they think are really spectacular looking. And our staff will evaluate them and decide if they are good for the food stock tanks, and they'll join the line. While the critters are in the hatchery, we're feeding them algae. But by the time they get to about 1 millimeter in size, they're too big. They want to eat too much for us to produce. So we have to put them into the outside environment for the first time, into what we call a nursery. And this is what you're looking at now. Our nursery is where we put the oysters, starting at about 1 millimeter in size. We let them grow up to 25 millimeters, depending on whatever the customers are looking for. So these that we're looking at here are clams. This is a very, very typical size clam. This is our most popular size clam, what we call an R6, which is about 10, 12 millimeters in size. And all of these are growing and will be sold as seed as soon as they reach whatever size the customer is looking for. We have 3 nurseries on Cape Cod. This is the one here in Dennis. We also have a nursery in Harwich and one in Chatham. And the benefit for us is that we're using different food sources, because the south side of the Cape is much different than it is on the north side where we are right now at Dennis. There's a different food source, the temperature of the water is different. So if we ever run into a problem in one area, we can always move them to another area. We experienced that a couple of years ago when a tornado came through and actually hit Harwich and Chatham and shut electricity down for 4 days. We were able to move everything from Chatham and Harwich here in a matter of about 4 hours. So we were able to save what we the seed that we have in those nurseries. As I mentioned before, we have 2 revenue streams here at ARC. One is our hatchery and seed sales. The other is a wholesale business where we sell market-sized, primarily oysters and clams, to customers around US, up into Canada, into Europe, and also into Singapore. And this is where it starts. This is 4 or 5 times a week. We drive this refrigerated truck behind me up to Boston to several around, as I said, around the country, around the world. Our product comes from several different sources. We have some farms that we work, and some of our seed is diverted to those farms where we grow them to market size. But we also buy market size product from growers that we sell seed to. 2 or 3 years later, they come back to us with that product and we buy it from them. The other area that we get our product from is from what we call wild harvesters. These are men and women who go out and by themselves to make a living. So when the product is brought into our warehouse, the clams go through this machine here that breaks them down into different sizes and also counts as we go. So that we can, I think we sell about 6 or 7 different sizes of clams, and this machine will separate them for us. So that's done mechanically. And when the wild harvesters come in here, this is how we know what to pay them, because they'll get the X number of one size, another number of another size, another third size, and we have a daily price for each size. We count them up, add them up, and that's what they get to walk away with that day. So once they've gone through that, we go into another area of the building. Actually, it's a little step ahead, but this is a packing area. All of our market size product is packed by hand. The beauty of that is that our guys have been doing this for a very long time, and they can hear a cracked, say, clamshell. So that the product that we ship to customers around the world, we get a much higher yield from hand packed product than they will from machine packed product. Because machines can't tell if a clam is cracked or damaged to them. Before they come here, we're one of the few facilities in Massachusetts permitted to have wet storage facilities. And this is a great procedure for us to use. And what it allows us to do is to keep clams for a number of weeks if we have to in fresh seawater that is flowing through here. It comes in, goes through the tank, going back out again. The clams are able to feed, but they're also able to purge any kind of sand or dirt that they might have inside. So we like to think that our clams in particular are much cleaner than they would be from exams companies that don't have this kind of facility. So one of the interesting thing about these wet storage tanks is that one thing you'll never see in here is you'll never see oysters. And the reason for that is that oysters are much like wine. People develop a taste for a certain type of oyster, a certain taste of oyster. And oysters take on the flavor of their environment. And so that's why a well-flavored oyster will taste different than a Dennis oyster. And a barstool oyster will taste different than one from two or a duck sparrow. So one of the things we have to do is keep the oysters out of here. We harvest them. If we get an order one day, we harvest them that day or the next day, and they're out the next day after that. They don't sit in these tanks because if they did, they would start taking on the flavor of our water outside the facility, and they don't want them. So if somebody wants a well-filled oyster, they order a well-filled oyster, and that's what they expect to get. One that tastes like just like every other well-filled oyster. Just as a side, well-filled oysters are very, very salty. They're grown in an area that is a lot of fresh seawater coming in and going out every single day. We also have areas that you draw up barstool. Barstool oysters are a lot sweeter. And the reason for that is that there's less water flow, but there's also freshwater river coming into the area. So you get kind of the mixture of the salt water and the fresh water, and it gives a whole different flavor. You'll notice that some of the oysters even look different. Some will have kind of a greenish tint to it, some will have a brownish tint to it. That's all because of the environment that they're growing in.
So that's a little tour of our facility. I apologize for some of the audio that couldn't, with the background noise. I have one other video to show you. It's just a couple minutes long, but the one piece that we were kind of missing in this is that we also do our own farming. And so we created a video of what a particular day, a typical day in farming would look like. So if it's okay with you, Jen, I'd go ahead and show that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
And also, like, I know the audio is really stinky, but it's amazing how big your facility is and how much is going on. And I'm sure we'll have some questions after the next video.
Yeah, I'll try to explain through those areas that were hard to hear.
Great.
Well, that's not what we want. This is all in Barnstable, by the way. So that's our story. If there may be questions, I'd be happy to entertain any questions. I'm sure there's a lot I didn't cover, but please feel free to hit me up.
It makes it look so glamorous, the second video.
Yeah, it's farming is not the easiest thing. I mean, obviously we did this on a really nice day, and not every day is warm and sunny. They go out in the middle of the winter time. They go out in the rain. They go, I try to hold them back when the winds are really high and the waves are high, because just to not lose anybody. But they work really hard, and they do a really, really good job.
Natasha asked about how long would a day out farming typically be, but maybe more specifically, Rick, kind of like how the tides affect what you do, and kind of following the schedule of the planet as opposed to the person.
Sure. When I first came here, not having a background in aquaculture or fishing at all, people started talking about the tides, working the tides. To me, working a tide would always mean high tide, but for us, it actually means low tide. Those grants, so the area, the farming area you saw in the video, they all go underwater for most of the day, and they uncover twice a day at low tide, and that's when we can access them and work them. That's when we can dig the clams under the nets that you saw, or work with the oysters that were in the bags that you saw as well. So a typical day farming is being out at the farm for about, I'd say, 3 hours maybe. They try to get out there a little before actual low tide. They work through the tide and work until the water gets a little too deep to farm. At that point in time, everything they need they've harvested is in the boat. They bring the boat to the landing, put it on the trailer, and drive it here to the facility where they go through it, and they put it through those machines that will size it, and they'll check for anything broken. We are a food source, so we have to follow some very stringent regulations from the Division of Marine Fisheries to the people that regulate foods. So there's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of measuring temperatures and time of when they were harvested and that type of thing. So the actual work on the farms, like I said, is about 3 hours, but They're working typically during the season, likely 10-hour days. They get to take a little bit less time or work a little less time over the winter, but it's a job that you've got to love.
Rick, there's another question, but I want to add on to the question. So what are some of the main challenges in production? Are you experiencing any challenges as a result of climate change? And I'm going to have a tag on question to that. I know there's been projects, because I've been involved with a few of them with you guys, on like diversifying portfolios of like shellfish farmers. And so I think it's like a two-pronged question. So maybe because of the challenges that you're experiencing, how are you addressing that? And I think some of it's through the diversity of portfolio and growing new things, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that a typical year is lots of challenges. We have not experienced a year that does not have challenges. And an example of what is being faced in our industry, the commercial hatcheries that supply all the growers, there's primarily 2 in Maine. There's now 1 in Massachusetts, couple in New York, and a couple in New Jersey. And beyond that, that's it. There were 2 of them in Massachusetts up until July this year, when one of the companies decided they were not going to be in the commercial hatchery business anymore. So we are the only ones left. Part of the reason that, let me take a step back. Last year, one of the hatcheries in Maine had to shut down for the season in June because of a bacteria in their algae that was killing all of their small seed. This year, the other one shut down in July for very much the same thing. We ourselves have been dealing with a bacteria for a couple of years, and in all instances, the things that happened to the 2 hatcheries in Maine and the bacteria that we've experienced, these are all things that would show up every once in a while, and then they would go away for a few years, and then they'd show up and they'd go away. The problem that we're seeing right now is they're showing up and they're not going away. The company up in Maine that shut down last year, they did over 200 experiments trying to figure out what the problem was. For ours, we've done about 175 different experiments to figure out what the problem is. And we're at the point now where we can't really solve the problem. So we have shifted over to trying to deal with it. We think that it's a typical pollution type problem. It's a problem in the water, we're dealing now with things like rising seawater. If you look at those farms that you just saw in that video, those farms uncover for a brief period of time twice a day. If the seawater rises 6 inches, they won't uncover, and that's going to be a problem, and that's going to create some changes in our industry as to how to deal with it. Jen brought up the diversity of product. Everybody in our industry is trying to diversify, and they're trying different types of clams. My goal is to have us being able to supply a consistent supply of scallops, bay scallops. We're all trying to survive in an industry that it's very, very tough to survive. So we looked to outside sources. We have working agreements with some universities on trying to develop different types of equipment that we can use. We are working right now on a project to try to develop clams that are not as susceptible to disease. Everybody's always trying to develop seed that will grow faster. Because right now, an oyster typically is about a 2-year growth period, and a clam would be about a 3-year growth period. Some areas are a little quicker, some areas a little later, but that's kind of typical. So, we have to be able to keep our clams alive for 3 years while they grow, and that's not always an easy thing to do. So I hopefully that answers some of the question.
Rick, there's 2 more. The next one was about the species of plankton used when the woman was in front of all of the different kind of plankton that you're growing out.
Yeah.
We really couldn't hear much, so
Yeah.
I don't know if you have the answer
Sure.
to that. There's
Sure,
actually, yeah. So
there's two types of algae that we grow. Both were isolated some 50 years ago from the creek that's right out behind us, and we keep the essentially the mother of this algae in a separate facility. And whenever we need to start a new process, we just grab some of that and let it grow initially in petri dishes and then in little test tubes. What Lisa was saying was that growing algae is a series of 3-day processes. So we take a little bit of the mother algae, grow it up in a test tube for a few days, then we transfer that to a test tube for 3 days, and then into those larger carboys that she was pointing out to on the shelves there for 3 days, and then into the bigger tubes for 3 days. And basically what's happening during those processes is over the 3 days, the cells are replicating to the point where the density grows significantly, and that's where you get the clear bottles that she was showing you were inoculated that day. By the time 3 days happens, they become very, very dark brown, and that's the algae that's grown, much higher density. That's then put into the big tanks, and the same thing happens. It was very quick to see her, I'm sorry, but she ran through a series of the larger tubes, and you could see that some were clear, some were yellow, some were dark brown. The dark brown ones are ready to harvest, and once they harvest the dark brown tanks, that's when they can be fed to the animals in the hatchery and in the other parts of the building, like the brood stock.
Have you ever used probiotics? And Arthur, I do know of people specifically using probiotics if you have more questions after this call.
Yeah. We've tried them, have not had a lot of success. Some people do. And that's in the algae growing area, not actually in the animals, like in the spawning area. But when I don't know if we cut some of the stuff that Cheryl was saying at the beginning of the video, the animals go through 8 weeks of conditioning in the broodstock tanks, and then we pull out what she considers to be the best looking, the best potentially growing ones, and puts them in these containers and starts the process from there. And basically she's deciding which oyster to marry up with which other oyster, to try to develop a good strain. And throughout that process, they spend about a month and a half in the spawning area, and through that process we're discarding a lot of them. The ones that aren't growing as quickly, ones that might have some issues with them, so that we may start off with 150 million from a spawn, and we end up with 10 to 15 million that are sent to the nursery to grow from that point on. So it's a continual process of evaluating, sorting out, discarding, and it's a process that Cheryl's been with us for 25 years, so she's kind of got the hang of it by now. But you know, by the time we go from spawning to putting out into the nursery to selling, we probably end up selling 3% of what we've spawned.
And then has ARC ever done open ocean systems?
For the spawning,
Natasha? Do you mean spawning, or are you asking if they do fin fish?
I guess for either one, I wasn't sure if you farmed fish, but I'm guessing no.
no, we don't do any fin fish. We do use some of the farms that we grow product. We call it growing it out. We do use it as nursery. Sometimes when the seed gets beyond about 14 millimeters or so, it's better to actually put it out in the farms in bags and let it grow that way rather than these small confined areas that we have, because the speed of the seed growing has a lot to do with its density, how many are in one unit, and the smaller number we can get that, the faster they'll grow.
Are there any other questions for anyone? That was like 50 minutes of a lot of information dumping.
Oh, wow, it has been 50 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan, you're leaning in. I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything or no.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in that second video that we watched, when they were probably about waist deep in the water and they were dumping the oysters, it looked like, into the water, what were they doing?
So one of the ways of harvesting clams is with what's called a bull rake, and it's as hard as it sounds. It's a rake that's about this wide, and it's U-shaped with sharp prongs on one end of it. And what they're doing is it's in the water. They're holding on to one side of it, and they're kind of like moving it like this. And as they're doing that, the rake is being pulled through the sand. And when it's too heavy for them to pull anymore, they pull it up and it's full of mud and clams. So that's what they were doing. And they can do that while there's water on top of the clams. Once the water disappears, it's done by hand digging.
Okay, what about when they it looked like they had crates full of clams and they were dumping the clams into the water?
They were dumping the clams into basically milk crates.
Okay.
And what they'll do then, the milk crates are sitting in the water. They'll actually take the milk crates and shake them in the water to try to get rid of as much sand as they can.
Got it. Thanks.
So, yeah. You look like you want to come and bull rake for us, though.
Kinda, yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if anyone's going to ask to come. And so I was going to ask you that, but I do see that Kristen has a question.
Hi, I work with farmers in the Barnegat Bay in coastal New Jersey.
Yep.
And we are working a lot with kind of farming for restoration. So do you guys raise oyster larvae for like spat on shell production?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
do you do that work there?
We do.
Okay.
And some of it goes down to, this year some went to New Jersey, a lot goes into Rhode Island, but basically what that is, we call it remote set. And what we didn't get into was in the spawning area, those conical tubes that Cheryl was talking about, the animals will stay in there for about a week and a half or so, and the oysters start to grow a little foot. And on the end of this little foot, they have a piece of cement, let's say. And in the wild, they attach themselves to shell, broken shell. And that's why if you find oysters in the wild, you may get clumps of them together. Our oysters are meant for the raw bar, and so we don't want them clumped together and have to break them apart because it hurts the shell. So we put them into tanks with broken up shell. The shell is the same size as the larvae that goes in there, so only one larvae can attach itself to one piece of shell. That's called setting, and there is a process called we call it remote setting, called spat on shell, where in our case, the towns of the Cape and also some individual companies and some states will come to us with bags of broken up shell. The bags are about this big and this big around, and we'll put them into very large tanks that we have filled with seawater, and we'll introduce 30, 40, 50 million oyster larvae into the big tanks. And over the course of about a week and a half, that larvae will set itself on the shell in the bags. The towns will then come and take those bags away, and they'll use those bags as a way to build oyster reefs or to mitigate erosion. A number of different reasons they use them. So that's a process that we do once a year. It's usually in June, and we do about 4,000 of those bags a year. So yes, sorry to answer your question. That's a project that we do. We've been doing it for a very long time.
Okay, so whoever's contracting with you provides the recycled shell, whatever type of shell they want, and
Yep.
it stays in a bag in your setting tanks for those 2 weeks, and then they pay you, and then they pick it up again.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
because we just got $1 million grant, and we're working with farmers, but we have a very limited number of contractors that do that work here
Yeah.
in New Jersey. So okay.
Usually the hard part is finding the shell.
Yes, it is. Yep.
In the case here, the towns of the Cape, there are 15 towns of the Cape. I think we do this for 13 of them. They all pool together and they buy their shell, and it goes to a dump, and the dump turn it over because you need to get it clean or whatever. And then AmeriCorps comes in and fills
Okay.
the bags.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so similar here, we have a New Jersey shell recycling partnership, and we're working on
Yeah.
writing kind of a recommendations document to
Yeah.
actually recycle all that shell, because there's such a high demand for restoration, and then the shell is like a commodity now where people can't find it.
It
and
is.
super
Yeah.
expensive, but thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Rick, are you open to folks emailing you with additional questions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Could you put
One of
email-
my mandates is to work with schools and colleges to essentially try to educate the next generation of aquaculturists, or this is a very important industry. The aquaculture industry it can be self-sustaining and environmentally, it protects the environment, and so we're trying to keep the next generation going. So we are certainly welcome to anybody asking any questions. If you're interested in coming for a tour, we can try to arrange that. We love to show it off. So
if you guys are, it'd be better to kind of coordinate on the same day so that we're not asking for 20 different tours in 20 different days.
yeah.
Rick, it's been great. I'm so grateful for you, and you guys. I put Rick's email in the chat, so you can. That's it, and really appreciate it. I really appreciate your time, and you guys. Thanks for all the good questions. That was great.
I really appreciate your interest and the time and for being asked to join you today.
Yay! Thank you.
Bet.